Today we're going to have a special storytelling time. We have a guy here who's supposed to know a lot of stuff. May not be what we think he should know, but he knows a lot of stuff. And he's lived in this area a long time. So he knows...
Stop shaking your head.
Hmm? He what?
Mary, you keep your mouth shut.
That's Becky.
Or Becky, yeah. There's Mary.
This man is Paul Roorda. He's a dairy farmer and a longtime resident, and he just happens to live on the Stickney Island Road where a lot of history took place when this area was just beginning to develop. So he wasn't part of the original development, but he knows an awful lot about it because he's found artifacts from that period, and he's got a lot of stories to tell. And with that, I'm going to let him start telling a story.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you can believe everything Jim said, because I really don't know much.
Well, why don't we start by telling who you are, how you got into the position you're in.
All right, I'm Paul Roorda. I was born in the Netherlands. We moved up here in 1948, I believe. And then in 1950, we moved to the Stickney Island Road. And my dad bought 60 acres there, and half of it was still wooded. All the land across the road was woods. And as kids, we did a lot of playing in the woods and swimming out there by the river. And we had tons of cables in there, which was obviously from the ferry that they used to cross the river with, right across the road from us. And it's right in Mary's backyard, actually. I have a couple ladies that are my neighbors, and I don't know, you got to get along with your neighbors, especially nowadays. It's kind of hard sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I got Mary right there across the road.
Yeah.
And she gets me into some predicaments.
I see that.
And then I got another lady sitting right back there. She's kind of mouthy to me once in a while. Sets me straight.
Ah,
But I always listen to her and do whatever she says.
that's good.
So I get along fine with these
Yes.
women. So anyway, we got a good neighborhood there. And down the road, E.W. Leonard, he lived there. I'm sure you folks probably know him. He was our representative years ago. In fact, his daughter just died.
Bernice.
Bernice, yeah. And I talked to her every once in a while. She knew a lot of stuff, too.
She did.
And but anyway, I worked for E.W. Leonard one year when I was 16 years old. And he was a good man. But he put me in a truck, and I never drove a truck before. 16 years old. And sent me with a load of spuds to go to the waterfront in Bellingham. Well, my goodness, I shook all the way down there, but I made it, and E.W. Leonard said I did a good job and whatnot, and I think I drove truck for the next 12 years or something like that, but he was a really interesting man. But getting back to the land across the road, us boys, I got 3 brothers, and we had a lot of friends in Everson, and we spent a lot of time playing in the woods, all the way from Everson to our place. And there was tons of cables in there, and I had no idea what they were for at the time and stuff like that. And of course, I knew Frankie Vogel real well, and he was the one that updated me on, he said, that's where the ferry used to cross. I says, is that right? Yeah. Well, then some years later, I think it was in the late 50s, we cleared that land. And, I don't know what they did with all those cables. It was Mac Zelstra running the bulldozer at the time, and I think they just pushed it all in the river or something like that. But But I remember we had, on the tax statements too, we had all little plots for the city then, wasn't it? It was a town or?
Village of NookChat was the name of it.
Village of NookChat, right there. And the only thing I remember is the old hotel was still there, and we lived in that house for 8-9 years. And my dad tore it down in 1958. I wished he didn't. I wished we still had that house, because it was a good house. You had a 3-story house, and it was huge. But he tore it down, and we saved all the lumber. Us kids pulled nails for weeks. And
I
then,
still have a square nail from that house.
yeah, it was all square nails. And then he built, we had enough lumber pretty much to build the house we're in today. Of course, we remodeled it a couple of years ago and spent some more money on it. But, you know, as far as the rest of the history goes, I really don't know much. You know, when Mary told me about this, you know, I heard about you, Jim, and I thought, hey, I'd love to listen to Jim. I didn't think I'd be talking, see? And I
Maybe the
thought,
two of you together can,
Well, Mary's the one, we'll blame Mary for this.
yeah.
she just come in from Bellingham and she thinks she knows it all.
I know.
Yeah.
No, I'm just trying to learn and, you know, talking to you.
I know, you
I didn't know
are,
there's a ferry over there on the
yeah,
river.
you are really,
Actually, they had the picture here and I saw it and I was asking
sure,
the
yeah.
Was that
librarian.
of the ferry?
Yes, the ferry picture. And so then I was talking to you about it and you said, oh yeah, we found the cables.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
And that is
fascinating.
this picture. This is the only picture that I know of that we have of the ferry. And it's called the Harkness Ferry, but the Harknesses were the third one to run it, so. But
Did you say the original guy that started this ferry business drowned?
yes, but this is a single cable, and you can see it was hung high on both sides, probably from trees, and the current from the stream forced the ferry along that cable.
Oh,
And this is the first time they could transport horses and carts.
now I have a question, you know, down in Seattle, in Pioneer Square, there's the Park Service runs that, the Gold Rush Museum.
Oh,
And I
what?
think the Gold Rush Museum,
Uh-huh.
if anybody's been to it, it's a small little building down there run by the National Park
Which gold
Service.
rush?
The Yukon Gold Rush.
Ah,
So I was thinking, would this have been in service for all those prospectors coming across to go north?
well, I'll go back a little bit. The first gold rush was in 1858,
Well, yeah.
40 years before the Yukon Gold Rush.
Okay.
And they did have a cable ferry,
Mm-hmm.
but it was, let me tell you. Well, identify. Roordas live right there. This is the Roorda place, and this was the ferry route down this way. Well, this over here was where Walker's Ferry was where the ferry was in 1858.
Oh, okay.
And the gold miners, back up a little bit, they discovered gold in 49 in Sutter's Mill in California. They all came out rushing out there. Well, a lot of them 10 years later had gotten pretty well discouraged with gold mining. And then a boat from Bellingham arrived down there with, I've forgotten, something like 2,000 pounds of gold on it. And they wanted to know where the gold came from. Well, the gold came from the Fraser River. Came from the Indians primarily, were the gold miners, and they traded it at the Fort Langley mill, and they loaded the gold at the Fort Langley port, and then they took it down to San Francisco to get it minted.
Yeah.
And they found out about it, and well, then the San Francisco papers got a hold of it, and within about 6 months, there were 10,000, well, they say 10,000, I think the count was closer to 4 or 5, camped on the bay, on the beach at Bellingham Bay. But they had no way to get to the Yukon up to the Fraser or to the Tom, except by water, and which is primarily Indian canoes. And so there was a trail that the Indians used to go up inland, and it went right through here. And so they got a guy by the name of DeLacy to clear the trail out 6 feet wide, 6 feet wide trail, 8 foot wide brush, so that the pack animals could keep the packs going through there. And it followed the old Indian trail. So, but then they didn't have anything more until Hampton came in 71 and started the problem was with the Indians is there was often, canoes weren't, the Indians moved their ferry every year, which to the most convenient spot. Well, white men like to know where they're going and what they're coming from, so Hampton he lived on the north side right there, and you'd come to the south side and you'd yell, "I need a ferry." So he'd get out and get in his canoe and come across and get to the train across. Well, the problem was he didn't swim. And that one heavy flood in 1878, his canoe overturned. And that was the end of Mr. Hampton. But his housemate, Mr. Harkness, whose family had homesteaded up here, he was living with him down there, so he took over the ferry. Well, to make a long story short, Mr. Bell, who lived over here, got murdered, and so his wife was a widow. So she married David. But 9 months later, he died. So she became the ferry operator, and that's the Harkness ferry that we remember that had the cable. Was Annette was a woman ferry driver.
Yeah.
So
Well, I noticed that on the plot of the property next door, there's that little lane, and it's called Telegraph. So I was thinking, is that part of the Telegraph Road that was originally going to be?
That was the old trail that went to Canada,
And they
right?
were gonna start that telegraph line.
so you're right here.
Yeah.
Which side are you on, the left or the west side?
South.
Yes, south side.
Okay. Okay, you're over
Right.
here.
So,
Moultrie had a store in what is block 2 here. Can you see that, okay, John? In block 2 was Moultrie's store. I got a picture of it here, but we'll just tell you the story first. And he plotted the village of NookChat here in 1884. As one of the first plats in the county. The only one before that was Wesley in Linden. And nobody knows where Wesley is, but it was on Stickney Island. Can you imagine that? And but this one was platted, and he of course had the store. Up in this corner of 5 was the Presbyterian Church. Next door was Annette and John Simpson. She had married the 3rd time by this time, and John Simpson there. And then next door to that was over here in 7 was the drugstore. And there were several houses in here. Osterman had his telegraph operation over here. And this was, the Telegraph Road technically ended right there at Sarah Eddy's Gate. Went from Roder's Gate in Bellingham, or Whatcom, to Sarah Eddy's Gate. And then this became the Telegraph Trail.
okay.
And which was an old Indian trail. And then by this time they'd started to, because they couldn't get wagons across, and there were almost no horses north of the river, so you walked. So you didn't need a very big trail there to get around. But then whenever they put the ferry in, the cable ferry, they could get horses and wagons across. The ferry was big enough to have a team and a wagon, so they could get them across. And so then they started to develop this into what became known as the Telegraph Road all the way up to Sumas.
But I presume when the railroad went to where NookChat is now, they changed the name and named NookChat down here by the railroad. Is that what happened?
Okay, the village of NookChat and the city of NookChat have no no correlation. No, same people,
Yeah.
different location, different spelling. This spelling was Moultrie spelling, which is the same as the city of Nooksack was platted in 1889, 5 years later than this one. By that, the post office was in Moultrie's store in Block 2, and it was called Nooksacht, because that was the way the Indians, that was as close as the white man could get to the Indians' pronunciation of Nooksack. So this was, the original Nooksack post office was right there. But whenever the city of Nooksack became big enough, they moved the post office over to Nooksack and spelled it that way. So this same post office moved. This was here. This is the only post office in the area until my great-grandfather created Tuxedo, which was where Tuxedo Gardens is. And then another post office at Gira, which is Damtown, if you know where Damtown is. Liberty School, Telegraph Road north of, near the Badger Road. That's where Gira was. And that school eventually went to Sumas. But anyway, there was the idea that people in the homesteads couldn't afford to walk over here to for their mail. So the guy who was writing mail dropped it at these two other places so the people could go there for their mail. So that was, but the village of Nooksack was very important because that was the first place that people could trade, could have commerce of any kind. It was
And is that
Moultrie store.
before Everson really got started?
Oh, it was years before Everson. Everson didn't come into existence for another 20 years.
Uh-huh.
So you're talking, that's the Stickney Island Road. I mean, basically, that's how the hotel got there. Is that how the hotel got there then?
That was the reason the hotel was up here in Block 10.
Okay.
Okay, now let me start showing you something. This is Sarah Eddy's establishment south of the river. And that is, she had a hotel. You notice she had sanitary facilities there at the back.
And that's where you went to get the ferry from that side of the river.
Right, that's the south side of the river. This is prior, this was originally built by a man by the name of Caldwell, who was a carpenter who came out here in '69. He was the first white man out here before Everson. And he came out here, thought he could make a good living building houses for these homesteaders that were going to be coming in now. And so he built this house, and then he got a job building the Western State Hospital. So he went south to work on the hospital, and his wife had enough of this frontier living. So the first person along was Sarah Eddy. She was a widow by that time, and she had Mrs. Caldwell gave her or I don't know if there was any money change, and she was on the next boat south. She went down to San Francisco. So when Mr. Caldwell came back in 2 years, Eddy was in charge here, and he tried legally to get it back, but they said no. That he left her. She was in charge. She got rid of it. So tough. But that was where the bachelors came to that were homesteaders. Until they could get their cabin built, unless they were living in a stump or something, or a tent, they lived here with Mrs. Eddy. And then, of course, Hampton had a ferry, canoe ferry, they could get across. And then Roorda bought it, and Roorda put the Roorda post office in this building. So the first Roorda post office was in this building, and it was done by Victor Roorda, who later became very well known in Bellingham. But when his sister wrote the compendium called The History of Whatcom County, she gave one paragraph to her brother who lived at the crossing in this house, and said he'd gone to the crossing and got involved in real estate. But he also homesteaded out here. He built the Roorda School. He ran this and had this, got married, had 2 children before he got to Bellingham.
So when they talk about the crossing, are they talking about the south side of the river, or that little village
The
is?
crossing is right here.
And so that, when they talked about the crossing, that's the area they're talking
Correct.
about? Okay.
This area, prior to this platting, was called the crossing.
Oh, that's what I was thinking, yeah.
But none of those buildings were there before, no, wait, his store was there. I think his store was the only one there prior to, they built the school and the store were there prior to this plat. So he platted this plat around the buildings that were there.
In
And
anticipation that people would come there, now that the ferry was there.
yes, he was a real estate man. He was the real estate
So he
man.
looked ahead to the future, okay.
And Moultrie is very well, matter of fact, was involved in the deed for our homestead. And he was very influential in the area. And he was also involved in the development of NookChat, the city of NookChat. He became involved over there and was very involved for years and years and years. The Moultrie family is very well established here. But let me show you some more pictures. Now we'll go, you've seen the ferry crossing. Oh, I wanted to show you this too. This was people who say we ought to let the river do what it wanted to do. This is what it wanted to do in about 30 years. And this, right behind your place is a drop-off. This is where the river was in 1906, right there. And this is where the river is now. But when the ferry was there, the crossing was, river was down here. So as you can see, it made a lot of moves. This is, this little dot here is where the sewage treatment plant is. And if the environmentalists had their way, that there would be no sewage treatment plant for either NookChat or Everson, because the river would have taken it out in early 90s when we had that big flood. It was cutting away there, and they did not want us to put any riprap in the river, but they finally got 2 weeks to put riprap in. They put those 2 little wing dams in, 3 little wing dams, and that changed the course of the river and saved the treatment plant. But anyway, that's another story. I don't want to tell you all that story. This is the Presbyterian church as it was. My aunt painted this so the river isn't there. The river was way down in front. There were buildings between here and there. But she painted that, so that was the Everson Presbyterian Church, which is right on the corner of the Stickney Island where it bends and goes north. Right across the road from you. So this would have been right across the road from you.
We have that hanging up in our church.
Hmm?
I wondered about that, if that was actually the river, if that
What?
close to the house.
Yeah. And this is the Roorda house, which was called the Everson Hotel in those days.
Now, show him, is that what,
That's the house that
That's
they
the
lived
house.
in.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first Everson Hotel. And up until
I could have remodeled that.
Yeah, definitely.
probably for about 15 years, that was the only hotel. Now, Moultrie's store, this was built in '76. It was the first commercial building north of the river. There was nothing in Sumas, there was nothing in Everson, they were just woods.
But how many farmers were out there at that time? I mean, what was?
Well, there were quite a few homesteaders, but very few farmers. It was pretty primitive. At this point in time, it was primarily supplies for the horse, equipment for them to clear land with and things like that. That was his primary. And he had,
At that same time, Linden was starting to be developed, and some of those.
At what?
Linden was starting to be developed too,
yes,
back in that time.
yes, yeah. Linden was about the same time, but Linden was 8 miles away, and that's a long walk.
Yeah, but the farmers were starting to develop in that area.
Yes, yes.
But they probably didn't use that store, it would be too far away.
One of the
No, they
problems,
wouldn't, no.
one of the problems with Linden is we had a forest fire in '85. It wiped out Linden. All the farmers were burned out because they'd cleared their land. So the fire had nothing to burn but their houses. Over here, we still had our forest, so it went crowned across, and the houses out here did not burn, but the forest crowned across. So, and one good thing about the '85 fires, they said that all the stump piles were gone too. Those people who knows about stump piles, anybody or stump farms, know that the stumps were the first thing to come out, and they always pile them in a big pile in the middle of a field someplace until they could get a chance to burn them, and they took a long time to burn those old stumps. But this forest fire took them out. So, and this was the school in 1876 when Mrs. Coop went through, and all of the, or 1886, excuse me, that all of the students are on Moultrie's porch, the porch of his store. So these are the students. It was the largest school in the county. It had 30 students. And, no, it had 113 students. The biggest school in the county other than that was in Bellingham, and they had 30. But this was kind of a boarding house. All the kids from Sumas came down here and everything else at that time. Then they started building the little schools. So this was the drugstore that was at the crossing. And talk about farms. This is the kind of farmhouses they had in those days.
Little house on the prairie.
This was McCaskill's farm.
You use your local indigenous woods.
And this is the old Riverside Park. You can see they have carriages over here under the trees, and they have their suits and ties on, and this was a Riverside Park. And it was just about where Riverside Park is now. It was very much, if you talk about primitive dwellings, this was how the Indians lived. And they weren't too concerned because most of them built their houses right along the river. So when the river changed course, they had to build a new house. But they didn't worry about it.
They kept up to date. They get a new one every once in a while.
Yeah.
There's an interesting.
There were only two that weren't on the river.
They had lots of little villages, and they had some around Linden up on the hill, and they used to live in little pit houses, pit dwellings. And then when I guess the white men came and started building little shacks, they kind of imitated that and came up out of the.
There was a longhouse where the Everson Park is now. That was O'Sulius's home. O'Sulius was a chief, and he homesteaded his 106 acres. That's one thing Moultrie did. He told the Indians they could homestead because they were, the original homestead law says anybody that was on the ground prior to the homestead law, which is 65, had the first right to homestead it. And of course, the white man didn't think the Indians had any rights. But Moultrie said, no, you're citizens of the United States, you're grandfathered in, you have a right to declare a homestead. And so O'Sulius, who had the village up on the hill where the park is, he homesteaded his 160 acres, which is where most of Everson is on the O'Sulius homestead, and not on Everson's. Everson's was north of the river, or north of Main Street, and O'Sulius was south of Main Street. And he had a longhouse up there, which is where most of the village lived. They used to live closer to the river, and then he could see what was happening with all these houses going down the river, so he moved to build a longhouse up on the hill. And I know because my great-grandmother used to row across the river every Sunday to hold Sunday school in that longhouse in the old days. And this is the women of the era. This is them with their long rifles. These are the three Rackendiver sisters and their long rifles, just to show you that women weren't afraid of guns a long time ago.
What was their name? What was their name?
Rackendiver.
Not Rickendiver.
Rickendiver, yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
relation to Don Rickendiver?
That's Don's aunts.
Is that right? I knew Don.
That was his house.
That's been used.
That's his aunts.
He grew up next to the river there.
Yes.
Yeah,
They were very early on, they were involved in the cannery.
yeah.
He was a manager of the cannery, so. Here is one, we talk about these frontier people as being kind of adults, not real brights, they're hardworking but not necessarily educated or anything. And most of them did not have educations. They were self-taught because there weren't schools. Most of them did not have the opportunity to go to school at all. So, but this is in 1883. They had what they called a Christmas celebration. What is that noise? What is it? It's called a Christmas tree. And it was in the park. In the park, they had a Christmas tree, which was really just a Christmas gathering. and they asked Reuben Fountain, if you know where Fountain Lake is. Fountain Lake's over near the High Notes Corner. There's a lake over there called Fountain Lake. Well, that was Reuben Fountain's homestead. Well, Reuben Fountain found out about Sarah Eddy, and he married Sarah Eddy. So he was part of the crossing group by that time. So they asked him to write a poem for this Christmas tree. And so this was the poem that he wrote in 1883. Without beginning, without end, Creator, Comforter, and Friend, great all in all, thou mighty source of light and life and Christian fence, with joy and gladness strew the way. On this the Savior's natal day, with natal trees, with gifts of love reflecting the sunlight source above, and while we provide o'er the birth of him who bore the sins of earth, we halt at love, Dame Nature's God, whose breath became a living clod, and hence the word, conceived the clay, was born, was man's true light and way. Was love's eternal God the just, the same who we, slumbering dust? That's one of 4 verses. And so, obviously these people were very bright and very talented. He also played the violin. So, where he got his training...
They had to entertain themselves.
Yeah. I was very impressed when I found that recording that was read at the time my parents got here. My parents got here in 83, or my great-grandparents got here in 83. My grandparent, too, he was 13. So, now, what other questions do you have? I rambled longer than I intended to.
When
And
did the dairy
our storyteller here.
around here?
What?
How did that progress? I
Oh,
mean,
that was when the Dutchmen come in.
We didn't let them in until after the turn of the century.
That's right.
There was a big wave of Dutch that came in around 1900, and then the rest of them came in after the war. And as we German people say, the Dutch were just better farmers. The German most of the settlers, early settlers, were German or Scandinavian. And the Germans were here primarily for the land. They revered land ownership. And most of them had come through Pennsylvania and Minnesota or Iowa, Kansas, and then eventually got to here. And so they owned the land. But whenever somebody came along and offered them the right price, they sold, because they weren't really big on farming. They farmed, but these were all subsistence farmers in those days. They couldn't sell milk. They couldn't sell anything up until 1890 because there was no way to get it out of here.
yeah.
1890, the railroad came in, and then suddenly things changed. But still, they only sold cream. They did not sell milk. They fed the non-cream milk back to the animals. So.
But what did the humans survive on?
Hmm?
What did the average person who was living, what did they live, what did they eat? What did they survive on?
What they grew.
But they still
To this
didn't
day,
think
I
they'd drink the milk.
still eat primarily what I grew.
Oh, yeah,
To this day.
out of the garden.
That's 100 years from ago there. But in those days, staying alive was all they could do. So they grew staples like potatoes and things like that. But their occupation was just staying alive. There was no power.
No,
There was no
electricity.
shelter, no roads,
Oh, outhouses.
no stores to go to. If you wanted to go to a store, you had to walk 17 miles to Whatcom. There were no stores in Linden, which was only 8 miles away. I was always admired Hawley. Which one? Hugh? Anyhow, one New Year's Day, he decided to go in and pay his taxes in Whatcom. So he walked from Linden to the crossing, 8 miles, then walked 17 miles into Whatcom, paid his taxes, stayed overnight with Roorda, and then came out to the crossing and back to Linden the next day. And he had 4 inches of snow, he says.
But if he had had a horse, he could have taken the horse on the ferry.
No, there was no, it's canoe ferry in those days.
Oh.
But there were very few horses. You know, we see pictures of them
You'd have
farming
to
with
have
horses.
pasture, and you don't have enough cleared space to
Right.
raise grass and hay.
It's hard to realize, but the coal mines in Bellingham, in Whatcom and Seaholm, relied on mules for their thing. Well, what does a mule run on? Hay.
Yeah.
Where do they get the hay?
Importing it probably.
They got some of it from Happy Valley, but most of it came from the Red River plateau. The Red River runs west from the from the NookChat,
Up by Slater Road.
south of Ferndale, and used to be the main channel. But the white man wanted to get steamboats up to Linden, so he had the Corps of Engineers block off Red River, and they blew out all the curves in the river, and they blew out the Toss Jam at Ferndale, and got the steamboats up to Linden. And then Linden became very prosperous. They didn't get them to Everson because there was another log jam in between. So then Linden became, you didn't need horses, and you could go in, the steamboats could go clear into the dock at Linden. And so Linden became the center of the universe. But still, Phoebe Judson was German.
And she's got credit.
Well,
How did the farmers till their land, even the small plots for growing their vegetables?
they all hand tools.
I see.
And I still have some of the hand tools my ancestors
So
used.
just dig and turn?
Shovel. They did have some wheeled cultivators and things like that, but mostly it was just shovel. And I know even when I was a kid, my dad always spaded the garden. There was it was all by hand. And then once he got the garden all spaded up, then Mother would plant it and take care of it. I helped her a lot, but it was my dad's job is to take a shovel out there in the spring and turn it all over. And we master gardeners like to double dig. So you dig it twice. You dig it out, and then you dig the subsoil up on top, and then in order to do it. But they didn't have to have a lot of land cleared because stuff grew real well out here because it's all forest soil, so it was very rich.
So Paul, in the 50s when you were here, you cleared that field, and then what did you do with it?
Burned it.
And what did you plant eventually?
You'd get a big bulldozer come in there, and they'd windrow all the stumps. Yeah, we'd dynamite the stumps out back then.
How many sticks of dynamite did you use?
Everybody had a box of dynamite.
Oh,
Yes.
some of these big stumps took a lot of sticks of dynamite, and yeah,
I've heard stories about using dynamite.
you'd have
Not
to.
having enough and then you use too much.
You never use too much.
Not him.
No.
Wayne Dunlap tells us about one guy that tried to save on fuse, and so he kept trying shorter and shorter fuses. He finally got too short of a fuse.
Not here to talk about it, huh?
He didn't make it that last time. My uncle, though, was dynamiting, and he did the right thing. He got it set, and he went through a stand of woods to the other side of the woods, and he blew the stump. He had a long fuse, and he had plenty of time to get back there. But somehow a root got through those woods and hit him in the head,
Yeah.
and his brains came out. 3 days later, he told the doctor, when he woke up, he said, tell the doctor, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm watching. He says, well, you're through watching. Either you're not going to fix it, I'm going to get out, walk out of here. And
Well,
by that
pressure
time, the
and
brain had
swelling.
swollen out, and it looked pretty bad, I guess. But he lived 50 more years, but he lost the sight of one eye. But
But when you're talking about, crossing the river and them homesteading and so, the weather and the river current, the NookChat is nasty, even now, and I'm sure
people
it was
didn't move
back-
much in the winter.
No, and in the winter, we have had some hard winters. They just had a little heat supply. Their life was,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it was all wood heat then, though.
yeah. But
And
still,
there was
weather,
plenty of wood
you
around.
would be stuck in a little hut. You know, you wouldn't go far if you couldn't get out the door.
But people helped each other, you know, everybody. I talked to one guy, this is around 1900, and I said, what did you do when you didn't have radio or television or anything else? How did you keep up with the world news? He said, Jim, the world was 1 mile from the house, and beyond that, we didn't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we knew what was going on within that 1 mile. And they knew what was going on in the next mile, and they knew what was going on in the next mile, and that was the way communication went.
And it took a
You
long
saw
time.
each other at church, and when we started getting churches, but 20 years later we started having churches. So, but yeah, it was much different. And I'm so glad I had my mother to tell me a lot of these stories. So her grandfather was here. Her grandfather, her dad, my grandfather, came when he was 13, and because they'd had school in Minnesota, so he'd gone through the 6th grade in Minnesota. And then he came out here and there were no schools, so he didn't have to go to school anymore. Well, in 1890, they'd built a new school up on the hill by where the cemetery is, and his brother said, I will give you a Currier and Ives picture if you go back to school. So at 20 years of age, he went back to school and finished the 7th and 8th grades and graduated in 1892. So my kids were the 4th generation to graduate from NookChat. My grandkids were homeschooled, so no 5th generation. But they start, yes, another question.
Do you have this written down for the rest of us and our kids? And if not, why not?
Yeah, well, I'm getting older now, and I realize that I don't have a lot of time left to do a lot of other stuff. I've written some stories. I wrote the book on Glen Echo School, which was very good because my wife had spent 8 years in that school. And yeah, that was a very, very interesting story. And told the story of what small schools were like in those days. And her mother had gone to that school in the 8th grade when it was first built in 1906. And so all of her family and extended family on both sides went to the same schools, 2 rooms, and for all their 8 years. And so I covered the whole family because they all lived in thing and went to the same school, and their Sunday school was in the same building. So that was the center of their world. And she remembered it firsthand, so it was really good to help me finish that story. I did finish the story on the trail, which is the story of how you got out here, because most people don't know how'd you get from the water to here. Well, the Indians had developed the trail, which we later called the Whatcom to Fraser Trail, went from the bay, Bellingham Bay, to the Fraser River north of Abbotsford. And that was the primary corridor, traffic corridor, and it was all on foot. The Indians didn't have horses.
Do we have a map showing it?
Hmm?
Location? Do we have a map showing the location of that trail?
Yes, I know exactly where that thing, because when Tennant came in 1873 to, they were having homesteads. The homestead law was passed in 65. How do you homestead when there's no legal descriptions? How do you decide where your piece of ground is with no legal descriptions? And so by 1873, they'd hired Tennant, who was tenantly person, and he had come in and was mapping all the section lines and all the township lines. Well, by doing that, he had a traverse along each one of the lines, and he'd say where he crossed the river or where he crossed the trail every time he crossed the trail. And so by putting these points together and then walking the trail myself, I was able to figure out just about where they were.
Were there many river crossings, or did the trail?
At the crossing. This is the only place it crossed the river. And there is a thought that the reason it crossed the river here is this used to be dry land. The river went north to the Fraser, and this was dry land in the beyond the remembrance of the Indians who were still alive when we started to write things down about them. But they do remember it being a long time ago. But
Isn't there a kind of a lake that people sail on up on the other side of Sumas?
Sumas Lake used to cover all
And
the
it
whole,
used to all link, because
the whole valley from Sumas all the way north to the Vetter Canal.
Yeah, I talked to a Nooksack Indian, he said that it all used to be linked, the waterways. The Nooksack and the Fraser were kind of linked.
That was their primary, they didn't like to walk either, so they used water whenever they could. And all of the Central Valley of Whatcom was flooded. Beaver dams flooded all the area around from Laurel all the way over to Ferndale. That was all underwater.
Interesting.
It's all farmland now, but it was all underwater.
So their all-weather trail was probably,
Was between the mountains and the waters was this trail.
yeah.
But this, if you went by water, the only way you could get to the Fraser was to go out around Point Roberts. And that was a long ways. So, you could go up the Nooksack, but you couldn't go up very far because you had to portage every log jam. So, and there were a lot of log jams in those days.
Yeah.
The tallest jam, they said there were trees growing out of the top of the jam that were at least 30 years old. So that jam had been there. The river went underneath it.
Yeah. And the Indians evidently had river canoes, and then downriver somewhere they switched to their ocean-going canoes, I heard.
Yeah, the Nooksacks didn't have ocean-going canoes. They
Just
used the river
one.
canoes.
But when you got
The
closer to
Lummies
the
had the ocean canoes.
Oh, okay.
And the Haidas, and the ones that were on the ocean had the big canoes.
Yeah.
I
Big
think they
canoes.
do some of that with Siege of Ski. They use some of those.
Yeah, the big canoes they were used were 60-man canoes. About 60 people powering those things.
But evidently, down on the river, there was a location where the canoes would dock and switch to a bigger kind that would go
I hadn't
out.
heard that before.
It's in this book, an anthropologist at Western was hired by the Nooksacks, and they went all around the area and found all the little village sites, and all of this information's in that book, but I can't remember what it's called. It was a while ago.
Well, the Nooksacks were primarily river Indians,
Yes.
and
But they did go to Tennant Lake. In that book, it said they went and hunted elk at Tennant Lake.
they went where?
Tennant Lake
Yeah.
and hunted elk. There used to be elk over there.
Tennant Lake wasn't where it is now. It was a much, much bigger body of water because of the beaver dams. But the fur traders, or the Indians, captured or killed all the beavers, and but they didn't blow the dams. So when the white man got here, there were very few beavers left because the fur traders had taken most of the beavers that the Indians had killed, and so white men started blowing dams, and they got beautiful farmland. It had been underwater for a long time, and all that silt and stuff got down there, and they just blew the dams, and one drainage at 7 drains 3,000 acres. And that's 4 Mile and 10 Mile Creek over in the Laurel area. So, but now when the river gets real high, you know where that where that was. So
So back to Paul, you cut down all those trees and logged them off, and then what did you guys do? You just had pasture, or what? What did you plant?
Grass.
Grass,
And corn.
well, there were a lot of
like today?
dairy was the big thing, but there were a lot of potatoes grown here. This is still the primary
Potato
seed potato
yeah.
growing area in the world.
Yep, that's right.
So, and we have more raspberries here than any place else except Hungary. And we have now getting more blueberries than many other places.
I would think blueberries would be better adapted, really, because their feet don't mind being wet in the soil, and there's a lot of wetter areas that raspberries
Yeah,
don't
there's even
like.
some cranberry bogs out here now.
Yeah, I've seen some of those up north, farther north.
So, yeah, there were various crops, but mostly it was just dairy. Subsistence farming. Well, they had crops and things. But most everybody raised, even in Bellingham, they raised what they ate. Happy Valley was the farming area in Bellingham. But that was the only place, see, Bellingham doesn't have any real good growing soil. That's why this area became so popular. This had the good growing soil.
Yeah, it sure does.
And so they came out, and we had prairies. Even Linden didn't have prairies. They had one prairie this side, but the prairies were where they grew. Tim Wall was once asked, well, how did they get the hay from the river over by Ferndale to Bellingham to feed the mules, to keep the equipment running? And I said, well, they scythed it. He says, what do you mean scythe? I said, well, that's where you cut grass in those days. You didn't have machines, you got to cut it with a scythe. And he says, and I said, they can cut that down below ground, because the grass was growing up through the water, the flooded areas. And I said, they just cut it off, and then they would float it to the edge and spread it out to dry. And he says, I never thought about them being able to cut grass underwater. And then they would pile it on. They'd put two canoes together with bridges across them and pile them full of hay. And row it across to this part so they could feed the machinery that was running the coal mines, which the big thing was coal.
Yeah.
That was the thing that got Bellingham going, was coal and lumber. But the lumber mill
And
burned
think
down.
they know nothing about the underground part of Bellingham, because all those plans burned up in the San Francisco earthquake. The company that owned them and had all the mining plans.
George, forgot his last name now, has the big mine in the northern part of Bellingham. It's all mined. He can tell you where, if you have a lot out in the north, up near Albertsons, that's where the mine entrance was in Albertsons. He can tell you how many feet below is the coal shafts and how many of them there are. There were several levels.
I've seen a map of it.
Hmm?
I've seen a map of Bellingham coal mine.
You what?
I've seen a map of the mines.
Yeah.
With Berg.
Yeah.
And they had to go down under the creek too, I understand.
The one in the north mine was good because they had a sloping entrance. They didn't use, we think of coal mines going down with a shaft and going down level. They didn't. They had they could drive trucks all the way down to the bottom level of the mine.
How deep, was that like 300 feet deep or something?
Oh, maybe 1,000 feet.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think there were many shafts under 150, 200 feet deep. But they used to park trucks down in there for the winter. People that wanted to winter over their
Nice
vehicles,
and
they'd drive them down
warm.
into the mine and leave them there for the winter.
When I bought my house on Victor Street, I finally got my deed, and it said that I had all rights to the property except coal. Because it was a coal
No mineral
shaft.
in
It
it.
was about 300 feet below my house.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are several shafts. It's honeycombs all the way. The Seaholm mine goes under the bay.
Under the ground?
And, there's a lot I can tell you some stories that weren't very popular about that, but anyhow, it goes down under the bay, and they had problems periodically whenever it get flooded, because they had no way to pump it out. So they just closed that shaft and opened a new shaft, because they get flooded to there's no way they're underwater.
So that's how everybody heated their homes and cooked and they had...
Most people heated by wood. The coal went to San Francisco, or into ships. When the first steamers started to come through, they burned coal.
And what about the railroad that started here at the turn of the century?
Well, I don't think they got coal here. I think they got their coal down in Renton. I don't know that
But they used coal probably.
they used coal.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used coal well up into my era. They were still using coal, some of them.
So I read a book about these Swedish people that came out around the turn of the century, and they were living down on Stickney Island Road, further past our place. I guess right across from Vanderhook's. Yeah. And the girls would walk to school, and if it was really a bad day weather-wise, their father would take them in a little carriage, But eventually the train came in, and they decided they would just commute to Bellingham and go to the college, which they called it something else. I think they lived in town. But I thought that would be nice to have a commuter railroad from Everson to Bellingham.
Yeah, in 1890 was the first time we could get out, and the started to use it. Mom says that she used to go down, this is in 20, late teens, early 20s. She'd go down, walk to Everson, which is 2 miles, and then she'd catch the train into Bellingham, and then she would get off down in Old Town, change trains, and go out to Silver Beach. And then she'd, at Silver Beach, Blowdale Donovan area, and then she'd walk up to Aunt Mary's, which was about another 2-mile walk. She'd get there about 4 o'clock. She'd leave house at 8 and get there about 4 o'clock.
But I still want to find out from Paul what you started when you had the new pasture and all of that, the field. Did you have dairy cows or beef cattle at the beginning?
Dairy.
Dairy?
Yeah, we put fences around it and we'd pasture it.
But you didn't have the big barns to keep them in over winter, or did you?
Oh, yes, yeah.
The barns were usually built first, before the houses.
We had to have barns to keep the cattle in.
Now, did you have any did your father and grandfather have any background in running a dairy farm? Or
No,
they just figured that's what they could do?
My dad was a wooden shoemaker in the
really?
Netherlands.
Wow.
And he had no idea what a cow was for. He started farming on his own
Well, he worked for another farmer first.
for 6 months or so, and then he bought him out. And then he rented the place. That was just down the road about a mile. And then when he bought this place, they run the cows down the road, and he started farming there. But yeah, it was a lot of hard work, you know. You clear land, pick up sticks.
I bet you preferred driving the potato truck.
Oh yeah, but see, by then he had all the land cleared already. And then later on, he bought 160 acres right there in LeBrant Road, and we cleared about 60 acres there. We were up there
In the 60s and 70s.
every winter picking up sticks.
And now a lot of that's developed into housing. A lot of that acreage is developed into housing up there.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not real good farmland up there.
no.
Just by the creek. Just by the creek.
Yeah, oh yeah, the lower land.
As I was driving down the Hampton Road, I saw there's this sign on this one dairy farm for sale. It's on the north side of the Hampton Road.
At Purpose.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, my boy lives there.
He lives on the farm itself. He's been renting it for
But
70 years.
yeah,
And then
that's
the
not a
house-
dairy farm.
It
Well, it
was
used to be.
years. Yeah, it was my
Yeah.
aunt
I
and
mean, the
uncle's.
families are still there. I mean, the barns are there, but you never
Yeah,
know. Just
yeah.
pasture now.
Yeah, her aunt and uncle farmed there for years. He probably sold out in the 60s, and that's the last time that was farmed. Now they just rent out the ground. Yeah. And she just died. She was 101.
Just 100. She just turned 100 in
Just
end of
turned 100.
March, a year ago.
And now they're trying to sell the farm.
Yeah,
Well, I hope it stays in farming.
Well,
I don't think they can
it'll
develop.
probably go into berries, or
Yeah.
because the East Indians are buying up most of the land now. They'll pay more than any Dutchman.
It gives them
will.
a visa, I think, if they can come in and put 500,000 into something, you know, then they can get some kind of visa.
That's the way it is.
Yeah.
Money talks.
Years ago, the Dutchmen were buying all the land. Now it's the East Indians.
Dutchmen would pay more than anybody else would, so,
At that time, yeah.
yeah.
I farmed up on the Haverstick for some years, and quite a few Swedes out there. And they were good people. I really got along good with them. And I says, when are you going to retire? To this one guy, he says, oh, it won't be long, but I ain't going to sell to no Dutchman, he goes. I says, you know, money always talks. He sold out to a Dutchman.
Not him though, the neighbor man.
Yeah, yeah.
You're ready to sell.
And that's the way it is now, too. A lot of guys, well, we ain't gonna sell to the East Indians, but they do anyway, because they pay that much more for land.
Well, it must have been a really familiar sound, the Dutch sound in buying property, because in my background, which is stretched all over the United States. They had, maybe I'll have to keep you waiting for me.
For your memory, huh?
Yeah, my family lived mostly in Michigan. They
Oh.
came through in Michigan, but my little granddaughter was taking everybody very seriously, and they were asking her, just teasing her a little bit, and she comes running to her mother and she said, "Mommy, ain't I aren't no Dutchman?" So that was just a byword.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah,
everybody knew who the Dutchmen were.
sure.
Yeah, they had a big influence in this area.
Oh, yeah.
My background comes from Holland too. I was born in Linden, but all my ancestors are from Holland.
Which isn't too far away now.
No.
Well, they were very good
Then-
farmers. I know my
Then they
mom,
had come by boat.
my mother's favorite discipline about me was, said, "Do you want to trade places with Willie, who lived across the street?" And I said, "No, no, 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 no. I don't want to work like Willie learns."
No.
They ran their farm, but it was, Dad ran a pretty tight ship, and he had a bunch of kids, and they all worked very, very hard. They were out. Little 4-year-old was out washing udders, and before she went to school.
And back then, kids had to work hard.
Paul, how many years did you dairy?
I dairied 23 years up on the Haverstick Road till Marty Vanderhoof got me out.
Oh, he burned out too.
And then I farmed 10 years here on my dad's place. And
Okay,
then
how many cows did you start with?
24,
24, and how many, when you quit dairying, how many did you end up with?
300 back
300.
in, that was in 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So from 24 to 3, you've seen a lot of changes in the dairy industry.
Oh, I did. And a lot of ups and downs. We had good years, we had tough years.
But you're not exactly retired.
No, I'm still in the cattle business, but I'm not,
Not milking cows.
no,
No.
cows. But,
Did you ever have milk by hand?
oh, yes, yes. In fact, I can remember the winter of 49 and 50.
Ah.
That was a bad.
Yeah, you got a good memory of that. Everybody.
That was one of your first years here, so it probably stuck in
Yeah,
your mind.
second
Oh,
winter,
it
I
was
think.
bad.
I wonder you didn't go back to Holland, huh?
Oh, my mom wanted to, but my mom, she grew up her folks had a bakery in Holland.
That
Ah.
sounds nice.
And, yeah, she come here and she was milking cows by hand a lot of times. Back in 1950, I forgot how long we were out of power. And I can remember milk trucks going through fields, across ditches. The water, it was froze so hard you could take trucks right across there. And
You had animals, little animals in the house just to keep them warm, calves and
yeah, we never did that, but
the people.
We improvised a lot that year.
yeah, that was a cold winter. I think some of those days are still record colds.
You
Yeah.
hear that, you see that on the news, like such and such a cold was this day, but the record was back in 50s.
But then we, shortly after that, we put a petcock on the manifold of the tractor. And then we used the tractor, you guys probably know how that was, right, Dalma?
Vacuum.
Yeah, creates a vacuum, and we could milk, usually 1 unit, I think, we could run on a tractor. And, yeah,
How did you get water for your cows when it was so cold?
that was tough. Everything would freeze up in the barns, and we always had a sloped manger in the barn. So we'd get the water going, we'd just run a hose in the manger, and it'd fill up in front of the cows, and then they'd just drink what they had to drink. And we'd only feed them 2 or 3 times water a day at that time, and sometimes it'd be several days before we'd get because the drinking cups, it was all pipes, and they'd break apart, and it'd take you quite a while to put all new pipes in again.
What did you reckon one cow drinks in a day?
Oh my goodness, I used to know that. They drink a lot. They drink a lot. I couldn't begin to tell you, but I'm sure it's 20 gallon. Oh, it'd be
No.
way more than that. Way more than that.
But even today, I mean, if the water trough, something gets disconnected and they're thirsty, they drink.
Yeah.
They have to have
And see, with milk cows, you gotta have water or they won't produce. Cows need water to produce milk. Like now, I don't milk cows, I just run slaughter cattle and replacement heifers, but I can be without water for a day and it don't bother them, because they don't have to produce milk.
But
Becky,
once they get water,
Yank out your phone and call Lois and Percy.
why would I wanna call them? They're related to me.
Dairy farm,
Yeah. Yeah.
they'd be able to help your memory with how much
oh,
cows drink.
Well, yeah, but it'd take Percy 10 minutes to tell you.
I have a question back to the Stickney Island Road. How did it get its name? And there must have been, maybe there was a party called Stickney. Do you
I
know
don't
anything
There was
about
an
that?
island called Stickney Island.
Yes, I knew there was Stickney Island, but I was wondering if there was any more or not.
You don't wonder how the island got its name. Because the original name was the River Road.
Yeah, okay.
But I think there was a Stickney group from some other part of the country, they started a mission school for the NookSacks.
There was a mission school on Stickney Island, yeah. They were from New York.
Yeah,
Two ladies that came out and started that. That was a Methodist school.
and there's
Indian-
even
it was
Stickney
Indian school.
furniture, so it
Hmm?
must be something from back there, some name
Could be this, the Stickney name came
from.
with the school, I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't researched that, yeah.
The picture you showed of that school is not the Stickney Island School that was connected with the church? You're talking two schools?
Connected to the what?
Are you talking about two schools? You had that one picture which had a class of 100 and some people, but then there was also another school that was supposed to be on Stickney Island, and was that the one that was a missionary school?
Missionaries built the one on Stickney Island, but the NookSacks also had a mission school on Mission Road.
Right.
It originally was right, well, the original plot was right here where the library is today, was deeded to the Indians to have a school, but the school was built over near where in the park. And it was there for, I don't know how many years, and then they built a new one out on the Mission Road. But there were, at the same time, that was also a Methodist school, and at the same time they had one in Linden, which was on Stickney Island, and that was run by the two ladies from New York. That was primarily for the NookSacks that lived in the Linden area. They were boarding schools too, so the Indians from a little further away could come to them, but there were those two schools that I know about for the NookSack Indians.
So Paul, where did you go to school when you arrived here?
Lenin Christian.
And was that hard to get to?
No, we had buses.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't start school till
Yeah, that's true.
after they had automobiles.
Roads.
Yeah, they picked me up and then they'd pick Cheryl up.
I grew up a mile out of town this way, and he grew up a mile out of town that way.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to date girls 100 miles away, and I was thinking how stupid. I was working my butt off, spending gas, and I thought I gotta find a girl closer, so I found one right across the city.
You didn't even recognize that when she was on the school bus with you?
Well, I knew her so well, I didn't think I'd ever marry her. Yeah.
See, he's 3 years ahead of me in school, so that was a big difference.
Ah.
That's true.
Yeah.
All those
And he was
little-
this rough and tough and kid, boy.
He what?
He was just this rough and tough and kid on the bus.
Oh.
No,
You know,
no.
trying to stay out of mischief.
It's quiet.
Well, you were the same, going to the same school down there, the Christian is. I told my son if he kept going to that skating rink over there, and then he's gonna marry one of them tall Dutch girls. And, when he met her at church, they went to Grace. But she is a tall Dutch girl.
Oh, but she's,
She was 5'11" when they married, they were the same height. But then she grew an inch after they married, so she was 6 foot.
oh my.
Now she has a daughter that's 6'1".
Yeah, they seem to get taller.
I look up to my granddaughters.
That's good. Yeah.
But they still have that German Berg blood running through their veins too.
Was that
No mixture, isn't it?
Now it's been a little diluted, but that's
Hmm?
okay. It's been a little diluted, but that's okay.
Yeah.
The best of both.
It took everybody to make this place what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's, as I was telling one of my granddaughters, or daughter-in-law, I said, there's prejudice in all colors.
yeah.
I remember Mom telling me when I was a teenager that I would have never been allowed to date the girl I carried books home for in the 1st grade or the books I carried girls home in the 2nd grade. The 1st grade, I was a beautiful little blonde girl named Susan Levin. She was Jewish. In the 2nd grade, I don't remember her name, but she was a Slovakian. And the Slovakians are Catholic. Matter of fact, in our little town of 5,000, we had 3 Catholic churches, and they would not marry between Catholic churches. So there were Slovakians, and there were the Polacks, and then there were regular Catholics, and you didn't marry them, you stayed within your church. And the blacks were all Baptists, so I couldn't be a Baptist either. So
You just have to give up.
just have to conform. But I came out to the West Coast where they were much more understanding about this
Yeah,
thing. They didn't have the same kind of prejudices.
they were just worn out.
No, they were so used to subsisting. They had to rely on everybody that was here.
Yeah.
And but that's true. But you think about it, the people who settled the West Coast were all risk takers. They came out here primarily for gold to start with, and they're mostly men. And then they followed the gold until the gold kind of ran out with the Klondike. And then by that time they came, I remember Barnes Prairie in Clearbrook. Barnes went up in 1858 to Thompson, and when he didn't get his gold done very well, he came back to the first prairie he remembered on this side of the border, which was the Barnes Prairie, and he raised pigs there, and it became known as the Hog Prairie because he let his pigs run wild. And pretty soon there were a lot of wild pigs around. You didn't have to raise pigs in those days. You could just go out and shoot them.
Oh.
Get your dinner.
They became wild,
We didn't fence them in.
but then Barnes left. You know, the trap line, what is now the trap line in the Van Buren going up to Van, was first called the crossing to Barnes Prairie Road. And it only went to Clearbrook, and that's as far as it went. But it went from the crossing up the trap line, and then it crossed over and went up to the Van Buren to Clearbrook. And the end at that time was known as Barnes Prairie. But there were a lot of the people who settled in this area. Some of them had been up gold mining, and they came back to this side of the border and settled.
So, do you think the train was here by the time the Yukon Gold Rush and all the flooded people that went north?
Yes,
Okay.
but they mostly went north by, the train didn't go all the way to Klondike.
No.
They went up by boat. But most of the people who came into this area until, let's see, the first train got here in 1890. So everything was by water before that. We came by water. We came across, we weren't hardy people. We're Germans. We weren't hardy people. So we went to wait till the train got crossed. And the first train went up to San Francisco. So we went to San Francisco and then up the coast by boat. Second train came into Portland. That was the Northern Pacific. That didn't come in until '83. So we waited. The rest of the family waited till that train got through, and then they came through to this, so they didn't have to go all the way up from San Francisco. So, but you came in by water, and once you got off at Bellingham, you got nothing to do but walk.
You could take a canoe, I guess.
Well, you could take a
Log
canoe,
jams.
but you know the way you got a canoe.
You have to find the
It was a
Indian
lot.
Trail.
It was You're gonna do a lot of walking that too, way too.
You
I'd
could
be
write a
in trouble,
song.
wouldn't I?
You could write a song, they wrote a lot of
You
songs.
need hip waders too, because it's all flooded.
I take my four-wheeler just to get to your place.
One of the funny things about the trail is the horses, did eventually get it wide enough to make a wagon road out to the crossing on south side. And then they take it across by canoe to the store. If the horses thought the weight load was too heavy to pull the hill, they wouldn't go up the hill. So
Which
you
hill are you
had
talking
to
about?
unload the wagon, take the horses to the top of the hill, and pack the stuff up and put it back in the wagon to get them to go to the next. That was primarily the Deer Creek crossing. But so that's why they didn't let people ride in the wagon,
Yeah,
because the horses wouldn't pull it.
it's more important to get the goods there.
And in those days, there was, they had some puncheon roads, the logs across the road, so that they keep from going down into the mud. But most of the time, they didn't travel in the winter because it was too muddy. There was little narrow
And,
steel
yeah.
wheels
Oh,
that
that's
cut
what
right into them.
the guide meridian was just the board planks and yeah, you get the thaw, if it's thawing from frozen, I mean, you just had a mud road. I don't know, I saw pictures anyway.
Ever seen pictures of the first ski to sea race? And those cars traveling to the mountain, carrying the runners to the mountain?
No, I don't think
They
I've
were
seen-
axle deep in mud. I don't know how they ever
How
got
they
to the
got
mountain.
there then, yeah.
Well, one guy went from Bellingham and his car got stuck and he went all the way to the top of the mountain and back. And he couldn't get the car unstuck, so he came back on foot. I can't imagine.
It was as far as it is today. That didn't get any shorter.
Are you talking about the trail that goes up to the gold mine over there?
No, I'm talking about the one that went top of Mount Baker.
Mount Baker? Well, this is just a short one, I guess. It's
Yeah, that's just a short
hiking
one.
trail.
Yeah.
But here's this log cabin and all this stuff, and the walls are all lined with newspapers, and
That's a homesteader cabin.
yeah,
He homesteaded up
most of
there.
them. Because it had the date of the newspaper, and it was plastered on the wall to make the wall thicker, I guess. But it was so funny to come across that, such a surprise.
Yeah, there used to be quite a little city up there. They had a dance hall. And,
That's
all
what they
the rest.
said, And they had a restaurant,
Where was this?
right near where I live.
And where the Sealand Road, you know where the Sealand Road is? Going up South Pass, go all the way up and then it turns and goes to the left. The Sealand Road goes to the right. And and then from the end of that road is a trail that goes up to the gold mines.
Yeah, that's what we went up. And it was really a surprise. I enjoyed finding it.
It used to be a road.
Yeah, and they said
They-
that
they
the
took-
stagecoach went up there.
Yeah. That mom remembers that. So I've talked to I got a lot of information on that.
So from the crossing, or the village of NookChat, the trail after you cross the river and it meandered toward the Linden area, the trail, because the other area.
There
would
was
have
a
been
trail
too wet?
going from the crossing,
Mhm.
kind of up the Stickney Island Road, and later became known as the River Road, that went to Linden. That was the only way to Linden.
And is that, if people wanted to go to Canada or anywhere else, that was the main way you'd go?
Yeah. There were some Indian trails that went from the crossing to Fort Langley. And then Linden was kind of a side trail off that main road. There were two main trails from the crossing. One went up to the Fraser and the other one went to Fort Langley. Primarily used by fur traders in the early days.
Yes.
Because the fur trade went to Fort Langley. That was built by the Brits. You know why it was built at Fort Langley? Because too many Americans got into Washington Territory. In the old days, the British claimed clear down to the Columbia. And then they created Washington Territory. And then the Brits got outnumbered because all these white Americans moved in. And so they moved their fort from Vancouver to Langley in 1826 and carried on their fur trader there. And then in the gold rush of 58, a lot of Americans, there were more Americans in Canada than there were Canadians. And so Douglas made it a law that you had to register at Victoria. And that
Oh, that
stopped.
would be-
He made a unilateral, one man made a unilateral decision to save British Columbia for the British. But we were talking about 49, 40, or 5, which is Prince Rupert. We were talking about all lower BC being in the United States.
Yeah, kinda, you'd have to come up in a sailing ship and stop in Victoria on the way to get registered. Coming up by land.
Originally it wasn't. Originally you could come into Bellingham Bay. That's the reason they all came to Bellingham Bay. Then when we issued that edict in the summer of 58, they all pulled up stakes and closed their buildings and took them back over to Victoria. And then they went up from there. Some of them went up the DeLacy Trail. We don't know how many, maybe a couple thousand, did go up the DeLacy Trail all the way to the Thompson and did that. But the Indians cut the bridge. We don't know when the Indians took the ferry down. It wasn't down within a couple of years
Where was this?
at the crossing when they cut the ferry loose down there.
Oh.
The lower ferry, the one that was on south of town, upriver.
Does it just rocket down the river to the sea?
Hmm?
Just all of the stuff you put in the river just goes right down into the sea,
Yeah.
and the whole house just stays intact?
Yeah, I got pictures of some buildings going into the river too.
Oh my gosh.
I remember when Cyrus barn went in and got stuck under the railroad bridge down here at Everson, so they had to blow it up. You remember, that was,
Yeah.
you remember that. They had to blow up the bridge, to blow up the barn in order to get it under the bridge. But it was forming a dam there, and they knew that eventually the river would push that bridge out.
That was the old bridge before then.
That was the old bridge that burned.
The old railroad bridge.
That is now the state highway.
Yeah. My grandkids were playing a little bingo game the other day in the car, and they were looking for a railroad track, and between Bellingham and here. And there's no railroad tracks anymore.
No.
You know, I told them there used to be one that went right across the river, but it's gone. You know, that's how things change. But the bingo game had a railroad track on it.
Yeah, well, they're trying to develop a trail out the railroad grade.
Yes,
But,
part of the Bay to Baker Trail.
That's part of the Bay to Baker, yeah. And, but it's got pieces of it is done, but not. You see the grade most of the way, but that's about all that's left down there. All the rails are gone, except from Hampton North, of course, the rails are still there.
Yeah.
Because they have to get to Linden. Linden was a spur off that railroad. And so when they cut the railroad off at Everson, how's Linden going to get any railroad cars in?
Yeah.
So they have to bring them down from Sumas now.
It goes past our daughter's house, and when the kids were younger, the engineer would see them outside, he would honk. The train would go past, yeah.
Yeah, the railroads were a big innovation. They changed the nature of the area.
Opened it up a lot more.
Hmm?
Opened it up
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah. It's hard for people to realize that the first transcontinental Canadian train ended up at the bay in Bellingham Bay, not up on the Fraser, because they didn't have a bridge across the Fraser, and the steamers couldn't get up the Fraser far enough. They couldn't get up to New Westminster, so they had to wait till they could get a bridge across the Fraser, and then they ran the railroad track out to Berg Inlet, and then they could go from coast to coast in Canada.
Well, somebody told me that all the rivers go north in our area here, and empty in the Fraser River they don't go south or west, they go north and dump in the Fraser River in Canada. Is that true?
Yes.
The Sumas goes north.
Most of my land drains in the Fraser River. And I'm right next to the Nooksack River. The land on one side of the road drains to the Fraser, and the land on the other side of the road goes to Nooksack.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Like all the land on the trap line road that drains into the Fraser River.
Because that's where I live. Kind of in the woods. I think I'm gonna be the only place that has any woods left. Oh, everybody's cutting them down.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful big trees.
Yeah.
You're on the trap line road?
No, I'm on a Sorensen Road.
Oh, out there,
Uh-huh.
okay.
Yeah. And it has really good soil.
That's off the Telegraph, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's right near that gold mine.
Yeah, yeah. That's where my dad had a bunch of land that we cleared
Oh,
up off the LeBrant Road, and then it goes back just about to the Sorensen Road.
You didn't have enough land clearing, you had to go to find another piece of ground to clear?
Yeah, he bought that 120 acres there, and what did he pay for it? $8,000 or something like that, back in the early 50s.
When he started making money, he must have had money then.
He,
First he was about broke.
and then we always run young stock up there,
Mm.
our heifer replacements. And then, as my dad got older, he always went up there and cut wood, and he always had a wood furnace, and he'd fix the fences, and then when us three boys started farming, we run our heifers up there. Well, then Dad got older, and then once he got into his 80s, he couldn't hardly fix fence no more, you know. And
I thought you would be taking care of him by then.
I told Dad, I said, you might as well sell that property up there, Dad. And so he put it up for sale, and right away, Glenn Blair, he used to be a neighbor of ours. He was in the real estate business. He died some years ago already. And he bought the back half of the property and divided it all up into 5-acre lots. And it was going up the hill already,
Yeah.
see? And then later on, he sold the bottom half, and yeah, he made a nice hunk of money on that.
Well, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, but he
when
didn't.
you get down to it.
But when you wait till you're 80 years old and sell all that, you don't get much profit out of it. Your kids get the most.
Well, yeah. At 80, you're doing it for your kids, you're not doing it for yourself.
I know it, so he really helped me out there.
Some of us are there, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, we are, aren't we?
Yes.
But I want to spend some of it before I give it to all my
Me
kids.
too.
Well, then you better get going.
I did. I took my whole family to Hawaii last month.
28 of us.
Oh, wow.
And that was well worth it.
You go on a boat or you fly?
No, we flew.
But, I mean, even the 14, 15-year-olds are talking about, oh, if I could just go back. I mean, they all want to go back.
Should have
Except
done it
one,
last winter when it was so miserable here.
yeah, but we
Well,
have to be around.
It was
I don't know, we got back home and then all of a sudden we had freezing weather. What was it, 2 weeks ago or something like that?
Got 60.
Yeah,
But the only negative remark I've heard is from one 7-year-old who said the airplane takes so long, such a long ride in the airplane. But otherwise, we had no negative.
no, that was great,
It was fantastic.
yeah.
Well, I lived in Hawaii for 2 years in the 30s. So that was really a change.
Yeah,
Oh,
that
yeah.
what,
Well, my father was in service.
okay.
We went everywhere. That's why they have no background.
Because you just went everywhere.
Yes. But I remember Hawaii just being so beautiful.
Yeah.
It just smelled like ginger everywhere.
Yeah.
It was, I loved being there that year.
Got good memories.
Yeah.
Well, it's been interesting, Jim.
Thank
Get your
you.
poster before you leave.
Thank you.